Okay, thank you very much for coming and joining us. I think it will be a great discussion. So my first question is, what do you think AI or machine learning can do in viticulture? And can you tell us the application that look the most promising and where the future is actually bringing us?
Okay, I guess I'll start. So, I mean, there are an enormous number of options, and that's probably the difficulty that we all have navigating through that. And I am very much the beginning of the whole journey, probably about to crash down on my expectations about how easy this is going to be. At Treasury, we're looking at it from a yield estimation point of view, from crop identification, but there's a ton of different things we could do and bring that right into our wineries with our real-time fermentation, modeling and measurement of energy uses of our buildings to improve water use and efficiency and energy use and efficiency. So really the scope is huge, and the challenge is narrowing that down to the pieces that you are familiar with that you want to be able to tackle, and having enough data that's collected in a kind of an organized fashion to be able to do something with that.
It's interesting that we're having this discussion now, midday, because I think what we saw over the last couple hours and heard from Gregory and Thibaut and the others is really deductive reasoning. I think as humans, we're really good at deduction. So there wasn't a lot of growing degree days during this certain period. Therefore, the leaf area is taking a long time to develop. The rate of sugar loading accumulation is less than 3 milligrams per berry per day. Therefore, the final outcome is not going to be where we want it. And so we naturally love this type of stuff. But then what if we get to the end of Thibaut's talk and the analysis was, gosh, this was a Bordeaux-like year, and this is going to be challenging for high vigor sites, And so that takes this kind of pattern recognition part that humans are really, you can't weigh all the factors objectively to achieve that outcome. And I think where AI in agriculture is really going to be transformative is starting with, the end result and really deducing what kind of patterns are going to be. And so I think we're going to end up seeing much more kind of generative modeling. So, you buy a new piece of land, how are we going to farm it? Where ought we to develop new pieces of land? Really, it's in this area like deep fakes that you showed that, deep learning is completely unprecedented in our kind of technological history to augment our brain to say, well, how is this year going to end? And therefore, what ought I to do now? Like, give me a couple scenarios for how I'm going to deal with this low, degree day accumulation in the spring, So it's exciting.
I think kind of building on what you guys were saying. So one thing I think that's particularly interesting is that in agriculture and in a lot of industries, we end up kind of benefiting from the technological byproducts of other industries. So pretty much every model, whether we're talking about deep learning or not, that we use, resulted from a different industry. So up to this point, there's very rarely, so all the architectures, the deep learning architecture, our data is unique to agriculture, but all the architectures, the fundamental math, the fundamental modeling, in the forefront of deep learning came from consumer electronics. That pretty much the best models are hosted on Facebook AI's research website, on Google's website. And so what you end up with is us trying to use someone else's models to suit our own needs. And so where that's been most successful up to this point, in terms of breaking benchmarks of the deep learning world, has been in computer vision, natural language processing, and speech recognition. The one that's most relevant to what we do is probably computer vision. And so most of what you see coming out in the literature right now or in products benefits from that computer vision, frankly, like explosion and shattering of previous benchmarks in the last 5 years. I mean, you look from like 30% error rates in 2011 on these standard benchmarks of image recognition down to about 1% error in the last 5 years. That's crazy in terms of the performance, and that's why we're on that hype curve, but I'm not so convinced that, yeah, maybe from the ag point of view, there's kind of a fallout and a testing and development phase, but it is changing almost every industry for that reason, because you're having this unprecedented capacity to model and predict outside of your data set that you trained on. So I think what's really, where we're at now is we're trying to use other people's technology to do something that we want to do, and where I think we need to go is to develop our own ag-specific and viticulture-specific technologies that kind of build in the knowledge that we've already gained and that all of you as viticulturalists and winemakers already have into those models. So.
Yes, thank you. I agree with what Mason says, and just one word on. We are maybe a little bit behind respect to the computer science. We are training our industry workers to make sense of data, and then to use these technologies. We are trying to produce tools that can use AI without having someone skilled in training these machines. And so that's why, at this point, we really need to focus on what are the most important aspects that we can solve. And what Will said, eventually predicting the harvest point or the aromatic profile of specific varieties, trying to understand what the potential of a given site are earlier in the season, what Adam said, and eventually computer visions and trying to assess infections in the vineyards, nutritional status, and increase the reliability of our common tools and the speeding up the evaluation processes. And what is unprecedented is the possibility of doing that on plant-by-plant base, because not only the technologies in treating the data, but also in actually acquiring the data over very large surfaces. So this brings me to the second question, which is, what kind of company do you think can benefit the most from viticulture, from artificial intelligence in viticulture? And if this is only for large wineries, or if this is something that even smaller wineries, boutique wineries, can have access to and eventually benefit from.
I'm for some reason going back to this interesting statistic. So we work with a company, BASF. They have a digital agriculture platform built mostly around optimizing sprays and whatnot. And they said, oh, and it turns out we've got about 2 million farmers on the platform. And I was like, holy cow, there's only about 2 million farmers in America. Like, how are you doing this? They say, well, actually, this is very popular among smallholders in India. And you think, holy cow, this is like somebody with a smartphone and an acre is making use of automated image recognition to say, I don't recognize this bug, what's going on? I don't know if this is a disease or a nutrient deficit. And so you can imagine that people who are ultimately, let's say, amateurs or non-professionals are able to benefit from AI in a way that is, maybe it even brings more people into agriculture. And that's not to diminish all the opportunities that happen for large companies who've made serious investments in systematizing their data collection and are able to get kind of real-time analysis based on, the way tags that are coming in and whatnot. So there's probably different types of benefits that are going to come out of AI for the largest farmers versus the kind of smaller boutique farmers.
Thank you. Amazing.
Yeah, so something that comes to my mind in terms of how useful, who would benefit from this and how, is that in the deep learning world and in the kind of state-of-the-art world of machine learning, what you need is a lot of data. Like when you talk about most data sets for computer vision, they are often built on, the ones that we'll use oftentimes are built on millions of images that have been labeled through a whole cottage industry that's popped up of people who sit on their computer and label things. So first of all, we tend to teach, these machine learning algorithms are almost exclusively supervised. Not always. There's unsupervised learning. What that means is that you as a human, or you as some ground truth, tell the machine what is correct. And it tries to learn the best way by just given kind of a set of data what that is. So how to learn that. So you need data, but what's cool is that you can take, what is often done is that we'll take these very large data sets which have been trained, and you can kind of just peel away the top layer and use that to build your own model that's custom to your own specific application. So what's happened is, say someone like Microsoft goes out and collects and pays for tons of data, and then what tons of people will do to build their own app on their phone is go in and just peel away a little bit, train their own, this is my hot dog versus hamburger analyzer on my phone, and all of a sudden you've got an app you can sell to somebody. So the big question I have is, it seems like there's a way to kind of use that model of larger scale data that benefits everyone, but fine-tuning to your very specific application that could be kind of coordinated across the industry, and that could make sense as a broader group to think about how to best do that. So that's just something I'm thinking about. How do you kind of scale when you may not have the money to invest in collecting all of that data, but you might be able to collect a little bit of data to make it customized to your own field or your own industrial process. And so that's called transfer learning, and I think it's got a lot of potential for this industry.
And Will, what do you think?
So, none of us here went to school to study this kind of thing, except for with the potential of some couple of PhDs that are sharing the stage with me. But generally, like, how does Treasury Wine Estates think about how they're going to put together a program that takes advantage of this? And I think it's the same as anyone. You don't have to be any particularly large or small scale, right? There is a ton of data out there that is useful and that is somewhat universal, like weather data, for instance. And so we do that all sort of naturally, intuitively, and it's really useful having those mechanistic models, by the way, that you can kind of interrogate your machine learning models with, so you can go, I believe this is the way the world works, and does my machine learning algorithm come up with the same answer? If it doesn't, then it allows you to go back to whoever's coming up with that machine learning model and question it a bit harder and push it around to get better answers. So, does Treasury Wine Estates have a group of machine learning experts in-house? No. We have kind of cultivated a group of, a kind of a constellation of vendors that we like to work with, and we're not of the scale to be having a whole sort of in-house data science department. So we make sure we work and pick vendors, weather station companies or ag data companies or you name it, that have some of those skills. Preferably they're in the Bay Area and benefiting from a bunch of startup money that they can spend rather than us spending. So it's a really great opportunity to be right here close to the Bay Area, where we can take advantage of all the money that is moving around in these learning areas. And then you've got to have a couple of rules to make sure that you can take advantage of this stuff. So you've got to make sure that all of your people who are providing you this information, that they want to play nice with you. Owning your data is really important, and you've got to realize that the data that you own is tremendously valuable to them, just like the other way around. And they've got to be able to, so you've got to have rules around who owns what. And then you've got to be able to make sure that they can talk to each other and that you're in control of that. So you're sort of the hub of the wheel, and they're all on the outside. And preferably by you, paying for some soil moisture monitoring, or you're paying into let's say, a group kind of area in Oakville that's looking at leaf roll spread or something like that. There's lots of things you can do, but as you start kind of joining those together, you can get much more benefit off the constellation of those things than you could have individually by themselves. So I would recommend that you use your vendors to help teach you about it, because my generation of people coming through Davis did not have Mason there teaching classes and getting people up to speed with what does AI learning, what does machine learning look like. So we're all amateurs in that space. So use the people who've come from other industries to kind of beg, borrow, and steal. And then I guess the other thing that's a huge potential here is how much we want to collaborate together. Now, there's obviously really
that was our third question.
Oh, I'll stop there.
So
then.
we can just
on,
start.
Or you can ask the question.
So, yeah. No, please go ahead. So how we can collaborate as an industry, and we need a big data set, and ideally some larger industry can or have been collected data for a long time, and so they already are a step ahead in developing a data set that can be used for building AI models. So sharing our data is another possibility. And I would like to understand, and with you, Will, how we can make the most out of our data, and what have been the steps in order to develop this data set that has already put you in the process of trying these applications, and how other people can get on board in doing similar things.
Well, if you talk to the winemakers and viticulturists in this room, everyone here is somewhat of a data collector, and we have records going back, and that's the nice thing about paying attention and really caring about the things we do. So make sure you don't lose that, and make sure when you upgrade your laptop, you don't lose that Excel file, and make sure you keep it all. But it's never well organized enough, and it's never easy enough to access. And Adam and I were talking this morning just around how to put that together. I think there's a lot of room for collaboration in, let's say, the Napa Valley grape growers or the vintners, right? So we've got common, we're competitors and collaborators together. We all share the same backyard. We all care whether mealybugs are moving across this area of Carneros at whatever rate. And so maybe we can use things like aerial imaging, or weather data, to predict the spread of this stuff and do practices on a neighborhood scale that would be much better. And how much better and quicker would it be to train a model that looked at the movement of an insect or a disease across an area if it wasn't just me in isolation looking at it, but it was a whole cluster of neighbors that were pouring data in a controlled and manner that everyone was comfortable with, to be able to protect that entire neighborhood and sort of like take advantage of that commons to lift all boats. So I think there's huge opportunity there. There's obviously other areas where it's deeply competitive, but I think things like what's the number of acres of vines coming on board? We'll go probably to Unified in a few weeks' time and have a kind of state of the industry, and they'll talk about how many things are planted and how many things are ripped out and what's going and what's. Well, the whole of the state of Queensland is now automatically being mapped for land uses and agricultural crops, and that's all just from aerial data. It's from people tagging images in the field and saying this is a banana plantation or this is a grape plantation, and pretty soon you'll see every year exactly the number of new acres going in and out, and everybody will be able to pretty freely take advantage of that sort of data in Napa or in California in general to decide what they want to plant next. So anyway, there's huge opportunities both collaboratively and competitively.
And then for the land use and remote sensing part, the Almond Board of California has mapped all the almond vineyards through these systems, and they have a live updated map that you can look at every year and see how the new plantations are being developing, and if someone was already planting in your area, and so on. So there is for sure some benefit in sharing information if we work on common objective as an industry. Thank you. Adam?
I mean, that's a really interesting lead-in, because that's a data set I've looked at. It's cool. There's no way I get access to it. And so there's a lot of like inter-vendor, let's say, dynamics where it's played out differently in different crops. Like in row crops, you have a bunch of agrochemical giants who want to be the total platform. They want to be the Google. They want to be, and that kind of turns off a lot of people. You see how that plays out. It's like, I don't necessarily want to share all this data, and then they're stuck holding all the cards. But I think what's interesting in specialty crops in general is you have, I think, more visionary companies kind of on the kind of food processing side, of which I think vineyards are, or wineries are in that territory, and they're served by a bunch of different vendors, and I think there's a lot better opportunity for collaboration. Say all the data that comes in from bricks measurements is then available to somebody else who's collecting weather data, and maybe make it available to a third person to generate predictive analytics. And so all of those kind of exciting opportunities for generating predictions inevitably depend on happy, sustainable collaborations among multiple technology partners. So this is where I think, one of the places where you as kind of the clients can help, move the needle is really ensuring that all of your various vendors are happy and willing to play together so that they're serving you in the most beneficial way. And that makes everybody more happy because ultimately, as a technology creator, I want to see people making decisions based on data, right? And if that happens, this wonderful future is going to take place. But that's the backdrop that we have right now is very little decision making based on current data for all kinds of reasons, But that's the more we play together, we can generate those success stories.
Those are really interesting points. And so if you look at something to go download on your phone during the break, is an app called Seek. Have any of you guys used this before? Anybody into identifying like plants or animals or mushrooms or anything? Yeah, okay. So there's this amazing app that was put together by Cal Academy of Sciences, iNaturalist, and the World Wildlife Foundation. If you want to see the potential of like what data sharing can do, and if you have any appreciation for how difficult it is to identify species out in the wild, download this app, takes a second, it runs offline, you don't even need internet access. Walk up to a plant, and it will very reliably tell you down to the species level what that plant is. I know plants pretty well. It does a great job. Like, it's really to the point where I look at it and I go, wow, this is amazing. And the technology that they're using is what a lot of us are using as well for these kinds of neural networks and deep learning. That's done because so many people put in their data into this fundamental database. I'm talking about like millions of entries. But now it's growing in its capacity to serve some individuals' needs. Of course, these are individuals of an interest that don't have a financial kind of stake in what this plan is that's sitting in front of them, right? So you have to consider then, like what you were talking about, how you deal with the whole privacy and kind of ethical / just corporate interests that are there. But I think that's where you have already organizations that operate in the general interest, and you have a sense for what is of general interest. And I think a way of kind of protecting and defining standards and/or policies for data collection and central repositories at kind of that regional level or in a certain viticultural kind of region already are kind of in place. So that they might be, like you were saying, a great place to start saying, okay, how do we define what the policies are we want? How do we own our data? How do we create the most value out of that data? And then that's kind of an endpoint for these companies who might want to innovate from that data to plug into, but the data, there's a clear delineation of where that data sits.
Yeah, and then you create also a new way to cheat for our students in weed science, I guess.
Training.
So I really like how the discussion is going, and eventually one point for entry as an industry could be not things that we have a stronger financial interest, like I tried to enter into the yield world, and there was an art bit, no one willing really to share how much the vineyards is producing. But eventually we'll most likely willing to share things that concern us, so risks like virus infections or other forms of disease, if that can benefit the whole industry, because knowing that eventually there is a risk for you nearby and you didn't know, can build some sort of collaborative influence on managing those risks. And then here in Napa, Monica Cooper is doing a great job for virus infections, and I think that will be something that you could build upon in already sharing those data. So I just would like to leave everybody with final questions on imaging that our industry is all on board, and really there is not issues at all in developing where we can go with these tools. And in 20 years, where do you think we will have what kind of app or system we will be able to use, and that will simplify the life of people in our day-to-day life as an industry.
So I think 20 years time. So I think there's a lot of room for using AI types of algorithms to expand your reach, right? So it's not about telling you what to do. It's about augmenting and kind of improving your clarity of how you see the implications of your actions in terms of real things that matter to you. So whether that's yield or quality or inputs. So if there's a way to then feed that data, I think by building the groundwork now, just by kind of helping the system, the machine, kind of understand what your priorities are and what your management actions are, there's a way to then feed in potentially too. I think that provides good framework for mechanization in terms of variable rate and kind of precision spraying, whether we're talking about applications and really reducing your input costs, or even trying to understand then how those types of actions affect the things you're interested in. So being able to make forecasts and projections to your yield or your quality on a pretty fine scale, and feed controls back into that system so that you can achieve whatever your desired outcome is. Because in the case of viticulture, it's highly varied, right? And that's what makes your particular product unique. So it's not that you want to just create a large monocrop of corn, it's that you want to uniquely kind of manipulate chemistry and quantity. And so I think making it very customizable, very fine-tuned, and then that's kind of where the future is at.
Thank you.
You pose this question about 20 years into the future, where is
It's the life of a vineyard, right? So,
but, I think, what are the tragedies of our time are, Syrian refugee crisis, things that are like, gosh, why did that happen? Because there's no water in Syria. And, upstate New York, you can read about, dairy farms going out of business. Here in California, every fall, it's a tragedy to watch the fires unfold. And so what I see is that farm livelihoods are under severe pressure, and kind of the long-term sustainability of natural resources are under pressure. It creates a lot of stress sort of in between farmers if you're competing for the same scarce resources, and ultimately kind of getting squeezed. The food and agriculture's share of the consumer dollar keeps getting smaller. And so ultimately we're talking about the vitality of rural economies and long-time sustainability. And you come into Napa, and on a nice clear day like today, you think, God, the world is just heavenly, isn't it? And I want that to still be true in 20 years. And I think the positive outcome of all of this technology is that people are able to make decisions to use scarce resources more wisely to ensure kind of the long-term sustainability. They can more agilely respond to stressors like climate change, and ultimately, kind of stay in business, not only surviving, but thriving. Like, that's the opportunity, and it's going to come back down to, how do we make higher quality, wines that the consumers love, and without, degrading the resource base. And I think that's possible if, at all these stages in the production process, from growing to making the wines to even selling and marketing, are able to make use of data to enhance those outcomes.
So it's tough to top all of that, but just to kind of build on both of those themes, I think our world is getting more risky. And one of the hardest things we have to do is make good decisions, right? You want to make a good decision, and hindsight's 20/20. You know what the good decision is once you've seen the vintage report, but how did you make that decision before the vintage report came and told you what was going to happen? So these techniques really allow us to play what-if scenarios pretty quickly and easily. We haven't got to wait for the rest of the season to unfold to figure out what the quality or what the anthracene or what the smoke taint or what the fire risk is going to be. We can we can start to do this learning in a sort of separate machine world that it doesn't have to wait for the real world to play out. So I think in 20 years' time, we'll have all, 20 years, that's twice the length of my career already, so that's out there. I think we can start collecting data now. We can start collecting quality data about wine. We may not know what we're going to do with it. We want to make sure that the data that's in our lab systems is available, and the data that's in our viticultural systems and our farming and payroll systems and everything in between is all available, because we don't know what we're going to do with it. But in the future, we'll be able to say, okay, so there's a heat wave coming up. How have the 5 heat waves that have preceded us in this decade really made a difference? And if I'd known that piece of information, then how would I act differently? And that allows us to kind of counter the increasing risk of wildfire or drought or flood or anything else that we're going to be having in a changing environment. It's also going to allow us to offset the changes to the climate that's happening to Napa, because there are always extreme events, and they always give you information. And we're pretty good animals at like figuring out how these extreme events, affect things, and that's the advantage of being in an industry like ours, where people stick around and learn the land and learn the winemaking for a long period of time. But the trouble is, those decisions and all the ramifications through levels of a small winery all the way through a massive organization where you've got fruit coming from all over the world take a while to filter through, and often we can't make those decisions in time frames that we actually have available to us. So in the next 20 years, we're going to be able to push a button that says, okay, the weather forecast says it's going to get these kind of conditions, the VPD is going to be dramatically different, and we're going to have this kind of ripening outcomes. Do we want to pick now or later? Do I need to move harvesters from one side of the valley to the other? Do I need to phone my farm labor company and start having conversations around getting on their availability list? All of those things will be available at a speed at which we need to be able to make those decisions, rather than right now, we're always right up against it. So I think it's just going to be a tool to make our lives easier and to de-risk an ever-increasingly risky environment for us.
Thank you very much, Will. I think you left us very inspired. And thank you, Adam, and thank you, Mason, for joining us. Thank you, everybody.